Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. In the world of post-hardcore bands, it's often easy to find groups which feel as though they follow the paths and trends crafted by the trailblazers before them. Then, of course, there's groups like La Dispute. Formed in 2004 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the US group have been hard at it for 2 decades now, garnering critical acclaim with almost every move they make. Following a series of EPs and singles, La Dispute released their debut album back in 2008 with their first Australian shows following the next year. Since then, well, it's been pretty hard to keep them away from local audiences. Likewise, new music would follow rather regularly, with what is arguably their most successful album, Rooms of the House, arriving in 2014. In 2019, they released their 4th album, Panorama, and after a local tour soon after, La Dispute returned to Australia only last year for another run of shows. Now, they're coming back for a special one-off show in November. Already in the process of writing their upcoming 5th album, La Dispute kicked off a special series of shows back in June. As part of their 5 nights only tour, the group embarked on a global series of one-off shows around the world which sees them playing Rooms of the House in full for its 10th anniversary, along with a handful of other classics. Already they've played London, Amsterdam and Berlin, and after a hometown show in Grand Rapids next week, they'll be heading to Sydney on November 28th to wrap up these exclusive dates before they hole up in the studio for a while. To celebrate this tour and their visit to Australia, I was lucky enough to chat with La Dispute vocalist Jordan Dreyer for this week's podcast. I had actually planned to record this as a bonus episode due to our limited time, so I don't get to go too deep into the history of his musical journey, but we'll save that one for next time. Anyway, check out La Dispute's Rooms of the House as a reminder of their efforts from 10 years ago, grab a ticket to their Sydney show, and once you're done, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Jordan Dreyer, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Love the name of the podcast too.
Thank you very much.
Can already answer some of your questions, I bet, right now from that reference.
Oh, we are saving time, aren't we? But I guess to introduce yourself to people who might not know your name, could you give me a quick few words on, I guess, who you are?
Sure. My name is Jordan Dreyer, and I'm the vocalist in a band from Michigan in the United States called La Dispute.
And a wonderful band it is. So I'm very glad we have the chance to be talking today. And usually with these sort of interviews in this podcast, I usually love to do this whole thing where I go deep into the musical backstory and all that sort of thing. But in the interest of time, I'm largely going to go through the Trusty Chords segment. But the main reason that we're chatting today is because La Dispute are returning to Australia soon. You guys have been to Australia numerous times, played many shows, and this time around you're making a quick trip to Sydney for a one-off show in November. It's part of the 5 nights only tour and the anniversary of Rooms of the House. So Jordan, my main question for you today is why? Why just 5 quick shows in London, Amsterdam, Berlin, Sydney, and a hometown show for you guys in Grand Rapids?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I sort of have 2 answers. One, we came out of the 3-year COVID lockdown to do a belated anniversary tour for the record that preceded Rooms of the House in our discography. So we hit the nostalgia trip pretty full bore coming out of not being able to play music for a long time, which was, I think, a pretty exceptional way to be reintroduced and to reintroduce ourselves into the touring landscape. But at the end of it, I think we felt pretty confident that the right choice going forward was to focus on the next chapter rather than continue to dwell on what's occurred in the past. Having said that, we also still wanted to celebrate this record. It's one that matters a lot to us and that we're still deeply proud of. So decided that we would scale things back from what we'd done on the Wildlife Anniversary Tour and just try to focus on some places that have meant a lot to us, some places with a particularly rich history in the context of La Dispute. And, yeah, so we scaled down to 5, which was difficult because there are a lot of places we love, and it was hard to leave so many wonderful places on the cutting room floor, but we really, again, wanted to not lean too heavily into the nostalgia angle, but we also are working on a new record and wanted to be able to really focus our attention on what's to come.
So then I guess while you're sort of looking back, you'll sort of be very eagerly looking forward as well. So it'll be a bit of a strange position to be in, almost like you're checking your watch saying, let's get off the stage. We've got a new album to make.
Well, I mean, not so much that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's a degree to which it's put us in a particular headspace creatively because we've had the opportunity to really dive deep into the past and to kind of think about these songs in a way we hadn't for a very long time. Um, which I think the unintended consequence was we really like attached ourselves to what on both of those previous releases still resonated with us and that we thought worked especially well um, creatively. So it put us in a position where we were in the process of looking forward, but we were also able to look back and say, oh, this was something we did really well. Not necessarily like, oh, the end product is better than what we're doing now and we need to revisit an old strategy, so much as like this is a thing that we still connect with. What happens if we pursue an idea in that lens? And I think it's put us in, I think, a particularly good position as far as our songwriting output goes. But you're right, it is kind of strange to be like, you know, you're really zeroing your attention on the thing ahead of you, and it requires some powerful set shift to get into the mindset of playing a record from 10 years in the past. But the beauty of it is we're doing so in a live environment, and I think that makes everything feel new and immediate because you see people in front of you connecting to it in a way that you maybe no longer do, but it puts you in that headspace again.
And of course, I feel like I should ask the question as well. Like when it comes to when it came to picking, say, Sydney for this show in Australia, what was it about Sydney that made you guys decide that's where we're going to play? I mean, what was it about Sydney that had the edge over, say, places in Australia like Melbourne or Adelaide, for example?
I mean, it wasn't that it had an edge necessarily. I think that the difficult thing with Australia is that everywhere stands out in our history. We have, you know, the first band that took us on tour when we made the trip fucking forever ago was a band from Brisbane. And that's where we made our earliest friends in Australia, and where we have, I think, a very specific connection. And we also have a ton of friends in Perth. And we made the trip to Western Australia pretty early on when I think a lot of American bands of our size and genre probably weren't. So we have a connection to Perth. And Melbourne is, you know, we played the biggest headlining show we've played to date in Melbourne for the Wildlife Tour. So there's like an obvious strong connection there. But we really only had the opportunity to do one, and we're recording near Sydney after the show for a month. So it was, we have all these places that mean so much to us. How do we break the tie? It makes the most sense for us to play close to where we're recording so that we can make that set shift again and go from that last show and then transition into the studio and start tracking a record.
Totally. I always like the pragmatic, logical approach to it as well. That always as
sometimes that's
it totally appeals to me as a music lover.
I mean, it appeals to me as somebody who has an intensely difficult time making decisions. So it's like, hey, we have a very specific logistical, practical reason to do the show here, and that kind of takes the head and the heart out of it a little bit.
I mean, I guess it was either that or just rolling a dice or something and just seeing what happens. But
exactly.
I'm very glad that you guys are coming to Australia for for one of the 5 shows. But I guess in the interest of time, I should get down to the portion of the podcast from which its namesake is derived. So for those listening who may not be aware, Trusty Chords is built around the average chord. So folks who know theory, standard chord has a first, third, and fifth notes of a scale. That's how you sort of make a standard chord. So extrapolate that a bit, and I talk about one artist that has impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and 5 songs you can always turn to. So, Jordan, the first question for you here is, who is one artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
Oh my goodness. I think that the artists that I have most consistently turned to for inspiration, both creatively and in my individual day-to-day life, is Nick Cave. Uh,
Wow.
and I feel like it's hard. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that everybody says it's really difficult to narrow things down to one, three, or five. But as far as like lasting, measurable impact on who I am, both as an artist and a person, finding Nick Cave on a suggestion from the record store owner in our hometown when I was 14 and first getting dropped off there to crate dig for hours with my friends is pretty transformative. And the catalog is so deep. Um, there's always something that I can connect to, and there isn't a release that I don't love. So I think overall, Nick Cave,
Plus,
an Australian.
yeah, of course, that's a nice little tie in there as well. But because I was going to say as well, like hearing you say that as well, I definitely feel there is a deep connection with emotion that you would hear in Nick Cave's music and your own music as well. So I would assume that would have an impact on your songwriting or at least performance style and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what part of what I love about Nick Cave is his ability to uh, explain or explore the human experience through narrative, through storytelling, through references, through what it be it, myth or the writing in the Old Testament. I feel like whereas I have, I think, at least early on, really relied on sort of um, letting your emotions just come out. I think that I've learned from Nick Cave and from a lot of the writers I love and a lot of other lyricists and bands too that I think accomplish the same thing to um, be less direct and to allow people to find their truth through the presentation of story.
Well, I'm definitely hoping that one day I might be able to have Nick Cave on this podcast, and he's hoping he'll pick a La Dispute for you. His number one artist. But
That'd be it for me. I'd
yeah,
be out. I'd be
again,
done.
a nice little full circle moment.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
now, what are three albums that have impacted you the most? These don't have to be albums by your number one artist, of course. These could just be
Yeah,
albums you're always throwing on, or something integral to your musical evolution.
sure. I'm gonna go back to the beginning. I think that a pretty cataclysmic discovery for me was the band Hot Water Music. Um, when I was 14 and first getting into punk rock, and my best friend and I were raiding his older brother's CD book to burn CDR copies for ourselves and found Forever and Counting by Hot Water Music. That was like, I think, the first time and maybe the most acutely I felt my universe shift on its axis. So that's a big one for me. I don't think that I would be making music still were it not for finding Hot Water Music in youth. Um,
And they're
I
absolutely
have to say,
wonderful band. Sorry to interrupt you there. I should say they're an
no,
absolutely
no, no, that's
wonderful
okay.
band. I was very lucky to actually have Jason from Hot Water Music on this podcast very early on, and
Wonderful
I
guy.
was able to get
Yeah.
his blessing to actually keep doing this Trusty Chords podcast and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and not,
yeah.
and not worry
That's
about some
awesome.
cease and desist coming out my way.
Sure.
Um,
Perfect. Yeah.
but I guess
Jason's great. Go ahead.
oh no, I was gonna say I guess before I start, adopting a lot of dispute names for a spin-off podcast, I feel I should
Yeah.
I should ask before I interrupt you, what was your second album there?
My second album, it's tough. I have to pick a record by Fugazi because I think that's the other band that uh, I owe the most to on a personal level for shaping my ethos and my worldview as a musician. And listening to Fugazi, and well, I was going to say that was a youthful thing too, but I listen to both those bands still, and that feels a little dismissive. So I'll say Red Medicine by Fugazi. Um, I think that they like stand out in a unique way to me because of the genre in which our band exists and the debt we owe to them for that, but also just to understanding what music can be in the context of a greater struggle in centering values over profit, trying to balance a creative life centered around community in a capitalist world. And it's a band that we all still listen to and still learn from. So
I definitely feel as though the word admirable comes to mind when you think of a band like Fugazi. Isn't it? Like the
yeah,
ethics and the values.
totally.
It's truly admirable. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Not in a hard world in which to do it. But yeah,
yeah.
third
Third
record.
record, yeah.
Third record. I'll say F sharp, A sharp Infinity by Godspeed You Black
You are
Emperor.
speaking my language.
Yeah.
That is an all
So
timer for me.
it has a strong case, I think, to be my favorite record of all time, while it's not the one I revisit the most often because I think it requires a particular listening experience, a particular reverence, a particular time frame. Um, but Godspeed's a band that I think has been particularly on my mind of late with the new record announcement.
Mm.
I just find um, their ability to cut through the noise and to say a great deal while technically saying very little to be very inspiring, and just the creative vision in general I think is just so fleshed out, so fully imagined, and so particular to them as a band that I just like really find myself in awe of not just the truth spoken to power, but just the creative vision to continue doing so on their own terms and
Mm.
in such uh, fully realized ways.
Honestly, that is to me, that is an almost perfect album. I actually submitted a book proposal on that album a few years ago,
Oh,
which didn't
cool.
get picked up. But it's the sort of thing, had it
Shame.
been picked up, I could have been talking about it for hours. And I'm sure folks like yourself would have appreciated it. Um,
Oh, yeah.
but
I would have read it, and I will if you ever get around to writing
well,
it or get the
fingers crossed. I'll keep working on it.
cool.
But for my last
Perfect.
question, and again, in the interest of time, I feel like I should get to this one very quickly.
Yeah. Sorry, I
No,
ramble.
you're totally fine. This podcast is all about rambling. The five songs you can always turn to, Jordan. Whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all. Your five trusty songs.
Oh, goodness, you're gonna force me to remember five song titles right now. Um, let's see. Okay, so I love the song "Don't Feel Like Dancing" by the Sidekicks, and I listen to it all the time. Band from the Midwest in the U.S., band from Ohio, that I feel never really got its due. Kind of a band's band or like an industry person's band, just like perfect, fun, smart pop songs. Um, and that song just like I think makes me feel a certain way that most of the music I listen to does not. I tend to angle myself towards what makes me feel uneasy or uncomfortable or anxious. Um, in that song, I just like find really in a not uncomplicated way to be fun and uplifting. Talks about love in a simple way, but a very profound way. And I think it's a really just a great song.
Absolutely.
Um, Now I got to think of four more songs. So I love the song "In the Dark Places" by PJ Harvey. If I didn't say Nick Cave was my favorite artist, I would have said PJ Harvey, and I oscillate back and forth. I think I've been asked the question before and said both. Um, and my introduction, really, in a serious way, to PJ Harvey was, I loved Rid of Me when I was younger, and I still do. But like, Let England Shake really like floored me with how different it is and much of a um, specific creative exercise the whole thing was. And I think that song in particular just like starts with this floor tom, and I can never listen to that song enough. That's a big one for me.
Mm.
I'll say "Talking Shit About a Pretty Sunset" by Modest Mouse from "This Is a Long Drive." Um, Really like transports me to a particular era in my life when there was less noise and less clutter, and I was with my friends doing dumb shit and listening to music all the time. And like the sad song that comes on at 4 in the morning when you've been hanging out with friends, drinking when you're 20 and feeling hopeless about the
Mhm.
universe or unsure of where to go from where you are. and that song just like really brings me there. And I still listen to it. Just rediscovered it by accident when I was with friends, and it played, and I thought, I don't listen to this record enough. And that's a band that meant a lot to me and still means a lot to me.
Yeah, I personally feel as though I'm forever rediscovering Modest Mouse. They
Yeah,
have this sort of ebb and flow in my life where I keep coming back to it and remembering, why did I ever stop listening to this album or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Isaac Brock is a truly wonderful musician.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean that three record run from This Is a Long Drive to Lonesome Crowded West to The Moon in Antarctica, I think is like pretty damn untouchable for
Absolutely.
bands from the last whatever 50 years.
Yeah.
I got what, two more?
Two more songs to go. Yeah.
I'm gonna say Choices by E40, which is an oddball, but I just think that song is so fun and structured so smartly, and I can always put it on and feel good. It just like makes me bounce and makes me sing along, and I love that song. I love hip hop and always have, and I think I don't mention its impact on me nearly enough. Uh, but that song, in contrast to the previous three, just like makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I think that
And that's what music's all about, isn't it? If it's not making you feel something,
absolutely,
it's, it can make you feel good. It can make you feel anything.
yeah.
That's
And I forget that. I mean, sometimes I'm so focused on, I don't know, what our music is not necessarily feel good all the time. And I think sometimes I lose sight of what music is ultimately about, and that's feeling something. But more often than not, I think it's about feeling joy. Even when it's about feeling pain, it's about uh, confronting and moving through that pain. So that's a song I love. And I'm going to say Nick Cave song, and I'm going to say a new one because I cannot stop listening to the song Frogs off the new Nick Cave record. Starts with this just like very violent biblical image in a way that Nick Cave does so perfectly. And I find myself disconnected often from new music, but there are the, sort of benchmark artists that draw me back into it. And hearing that first single when it was released was a nice reminder, not only that Nick Cave is still doing things that alter my life for the better, but that I should be paying more attention to what's coming down the pipeline, because there's always great new music and it's not strictly from legacy artists. So it just kind of like recentered, I think, the value of music in my life, because I'll go periods of time where I listen to nothing but podcasts or I read or whatever, and I sort of forget the thing that I love the most and the art form that I understand the best from having done it for so long. So, song's amazing.
Yeah, I've sadly not actually heard it yet, only because I've been waiting for the perfect moment to listen to the album in full. I'm the sort of
Yeah,
person who, I don't love singles. I love to sort of experience it as a full
yeah,
body of work, and I'm waiting for
I think that's great.
waiting for that perfect sort of like afternoon just to throw it on and just like lean
Sure,
into it. So I'm
that's
sure.
smart. That's absolutely smart.
Well, I'm sure that when I listen to it, I'll be saying, you know what, Jordan, he had his head on right. He knows what he's talking about.
I don't think you'll be disappointed.
I doubt I will.
Yeah,
But I should say, Jordan Dreyer, thank you so very much for being generous with your time today and for being part of the
of
Trusty
course.
Chords podcast.
It was such a blast. I appreciate you having me. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to me.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you enjoyed this episode, then I would truly love it if you were able to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast if you feel so inclined. I know I'm getting a little predictable, but in the interest of ensuring your expectations are met, I'd love it if you could do what I just said. Oh, and if you like social media, well, I've got great news. You can find me over on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. I've also got a blog for this podcast on my website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's TYLERJENKE/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. You can find entries on each episode, the songs picked by artists, and a playlist of all of them too. You can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can swing me a few dollars to support this podcast if you feel so inclined. As always, there's no obligation, but I'd appreciate it all the same. Lastly, I need to thank Jordan Dreyer for appearing on the podcast this week, and I also need to express my gratitude to Dave Giannis of Diamond Creative for helping organise this chat as well. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.